Welcome to the Velvet Crown Tales. Today's tale is the goddess who chose the underworld. Long before Persephone ever entered the underworld, she had already given her heart away. Not to a handsome prince, not to a mighty warrior, not to one of the shining gods of Olympus. She loved Hades, the king of the underworld, the god everyone feared, the god everyone avoided, the god who always stood alone. Whenever the gods gathered for celebrations, Persephone found herself searching for him. While music echoed through the halls of Olympus and laughter filled the air, Hades always remained apart from the crowd. He never joined their conversations. He never boasted about his accomplishments. He never demanded attention. Instead, he stood quietly near the edge of the room, watching from a distance. Most gods were uncomfortable around him. After all, he ruled over death. Many feared him simply because they did not understand him. Others ignored him entirely. But Persephone saw something different. She saw loneliness. She saw a king carrying a burden no other god could bear. Every soul that died eventually entered his kingdom. Every judgment, every sorrow, every farewell. Hades carried them all without complaint. Yet no one thanked him. No one appreciated him. No one truly saw him. Except Persephone. For years she admired him from afar. She watched him arrive alone. She watched him leave alone. And every time, her heart ached for him. One evening, during a grand feast on Olympus, Persephone once again found herself watching him. The hall glittered with golden light. Gods laughed around tables overflowing with food and nectar. Yet Hades stood by a balcony overlooking the clouds, completely by himself. Persephone couldn't look away. As if sensing her gaze, Hades suddenly turned. For a brief moment their eyes met. Persephone's heart skipped a beat. The noise of Olympus seemed to disappear. There was only Hades, the lonely king she had loved for so long. But just as quickly he looked away. To him it was nothing. A simple glance. A passing moment. To Persephone, it meant everything. As Hades turned back toward the sky, Persephone smiled softly. One day she promised herself. One day he would know the truth. One day she would tell him that while the world feared the king of the dead, there was one goddess who had loved him from the very beginning. The following morning, word spread throughout Olympus. Zeus had summoned every god and goddess to the great throne hall. No one knew why. Rumors raced through the heavens. Some believed a war was coming. Others feared trouble among the Titans. By midday the grand hall was filled. Golden pillars stretched toward the sky. Clouds drifted beneath crystal floors. The rulers of Olympus sat upon their magnificent thrones. Even Hades had arrived from the underworld. As always, he stood apart from the others. Persephone's heart fluttered the moment she saw him. She had not stopped thinking about him since the celebration the night before. Unfortunately, Hades barely seemed to notice she existed. He remained focused on Zeus, waiting, watching, silent. The room finally fell quiet as Zeus rose from his throne. I have made a decision regarding the future of Olympus and the underworld. Every eye turned toward him. The king of the underworld has ruled alone for far too long. Murmurs immediately spread throughout the hall. Even Hades frowned. Zeus continued. The underworld requires a queen. The whispers grew louder. Many gods exchanged curious glances. A few goddesses straightened in their seats. Then Zeus spoke the words that would change everything. I have chosen Persephone. The room exploded into shock. Several goblets fell to the floor. Conversations erupted instantly. Demeter shot to her feet. What? Even Poseidon looked surprised. Across the hall, Hades stood completely frozen. For the first time in centuries, the king of the underworld looked genuinely stunned. But no one was more surprised than the gods watching Persephone. Because instead of looking horrified, she smiled. A small smile. Then a larger one. Until she could barely contain her happiness. Years. She had waited years for this moment. Years of loving Hades from afar. Years of dreaming about speaking to him. Years of wondering if fate would ever bring them together. And now it finally had. The other gods stared in disbelief. Most expected tears. Or protests. Or fear. Instead, Persephone looked happier than anyone in the room. Demeter noticed immediately. Persephone, The goddess of spring quickly composed herself, trying very hard not to look too excited. Unfortunately, it was already too late. Several gods were openly staring. Meanwhile, Hades looked as though the world had suddenly stopped making sense. His gaze moved from Zeus to Persephone, then back to Zeus again. Surely there had been some mistake. The bright goddess of spring belonged among flowers and sunshine, not among the dead, not in the underworld, and certainly not with him. For the first time in many years, Hades spoke before the council was dismissed. No. The single word echoed throughout the hall. Every conversation immediately stopped. Silence fell over Olympus. Hades looked directly at Zeus. I refuse. And for the first time that day, it was Persephone's turn to be shocked. The great throne hall fell silent. No one could remember the last time Hades had openly disagreed with Zeus. Yet there he stood, tall and unshaken, his dark gaze fixed on the king of the gods. I refuse. The words echoed through Olympus. Gasps spread throughout the hall. Several gods stared in disbelief. Demeter looked relieved. Zeus looked annoyed. Persephone felt her heart sink. For years she had dreamed about being with Hades. Now, when fate had finally brought them together, he was rejecting the idea entirely. Zeus narrowed his eyes. You refuse? Yes. The king of the underworld remained calm. The arrangement is unsuitable. A murmur spread through the crowd. Unsuitable? Persephone clenched her hands together. Was she unsuitable? Or was it him? Hades continued. Persephone belongs among sunlight and flowers. His voice remained steady. The underworld is no place for her. The words stung. Not because he was being cruel, but because Persephone realized he truly believed it. He wasn't rejecting her, he was rejecting himself. Hades looked toward Persephone for the first time. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, Persephone thought she saw sadness in his expression. Then it vanished. You deserve better than the underworld. The words felt like a knife through her heart. Because she knew what he really meant. You deserve better than me. The hall erupted into arguments. Some gods agreed with Hades. Others argued that Zeus had already made his decision. Demeter demanded the proposal be cancelled immediately. But Persephone barely heard any of it. Her attention remained fixed on Hades. For years she had imagined countless reasons why he might not love her. She had never imagined this. He wasn't pushing her away because he disliked her. He was pushing her away because he believed she could never be happy with him. Zeus finally rose from his throne. The matter is not finished. The room quieted once more. I will consider your objection. With that, the meeting was dismissed. The gods immediately broke into excited conversations. Rumors spread like wildfire through Olympus. But Persephone remained where she stood, watching Hades. For a moment she considered approaching him, telling him the truth, telling him she had loved him for years. But before she could take a single step, Hades turned and walked away. His dark cloak vanished into the crowd, leaving Persephone standing alone. She watched him go until he disappeared from sight. Then she made a promise to herself. If Hades believed she belonged somewhere else, she would prove him wrong. No matter how long it took, no matter how many times he pushed her away, she would show him that she had already chosen. And she had chosen him. The days after the council meeting were difficult for Persephone. Not because she had been chosen to become queen of the underworld, but because Hades wanted nothing to do with her. Every time she remembered his words, her heart ached. You deserve better than the underworld. You don't belong there. At first, Persephone thought he was rejecting her. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized the truth. Hades wasn't rejecting her. He was rejecting himself. He truly believed she could never be happy with him. That realization only made her love him more. For years she had loved the king of the underworld from afar. She wasn't going to give up now. Not when fate had finally given her a chance. One morning Persephone made a decision. If Hades refused to come to her, she would go to him. Ignoring her mother's warnings, she traveled to the entrance of the underworld. Massive black gates towered before her, cold mist drifted across the ground. Ancient pillars disappeared into darkness. Most gods avoided this place. Persephone walked through the gates without hesitation. The guards immediately recognized her. The Lady Persephone. They bowed respectfully. Persephone smiled. "Is Hades here?" The guards exchanged nervous glances. "He is." "Wonderful." Without waiting for permission, Persephone continued inside. Deep within the underworld, Hades sat upon his throne, reviewing the judgments of newly arrived souls. The massive chamber was silent. Until the doors suddenly opened. Hades looked up and froze. Persephone stood in the doorway, smiling. "Hello." Hades stared at her. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you." "You shouldn't be here." Persephone walked farther into the room. "Good to see you too." Over the following months, this became a regular occurrence. Whenever Hades disappeared into the underworld, Persephone somehow found him. If he worked in the Hall of Judgment, she appeared with food. If he inspected distant regions of his kingdom, she followed. If he spent hours reading reports, she sat nearby with a book of her own. No matter where he went, Persephone always seemed to appear. The palace servants quickly noticed. Soon they were secretly making bets on how long it would take Persephone to find him. The current record was 12 minutes. Hades remained determined to keep his distance. But Persephone refused to leave. She wasn't demanding. She wasn't angry. She simply stayed. Day after day, week after week, month after month. Every time he pushed her away, she returned with a smile. Every time he told her to leave, she came back the next day. Slowly, something began to change. The lonely king of the underworld started looking forward to seeing her, though he would never admit it. One evening, Persephone wandered through an abandoned region of the underworld. The landscape was gray and lifeless. No flowers, no color, no beauty. Only endless stone and shadows. For the first time, she truly understood why Hades believed she could never belong here. The underworld wasn't evil, it was lonely. Just like its king. Persephone knelt and placed her hand on the cold earth. A gentle smile touched her lips. Maybe she couldn't change Hades' mind overnight. But perhaps she could change the underworld. And if she could change the underworld, perhaps one day she could change the way Hades saw himself. Persephone could not stop thinking about what she had seen. The underworld was enormous. It stretched farther than any kingdom in the mortal world, filled with ancient cities, endless valleys, and towering palaces carved from black stone. Yet despite its size, everything felt empty. Gray earth covered the landscape, cold mist drifted through silent fields. The souls who walked its roads rarely spoke. There was no laughter, no color, no life. For the first time, Persephone truly understood Hades. He ruled a kingdom that never knew spring, a kingdom where beauty had long been forgotten, a kingdom as lonely as the king himself. And suddenly, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. The next morning, Persephone arrived, carrying a small basket. Hades noticed it immediately. "What is that?" he asked. Persephone smiled. "A surprise." Hades narrowed his eyes. That answer rarely led to anything good. Ignoring his confusion, Persephone walked to an abandoned corner of the palace grounds. The earth was dark and barren. Nothing had grown there for thousands of years. She knelt and gently placed her hand against the soil. A warm golden glow spread from her fingertips. The ground shimmered beneath her touch. Tiny green shoots pushed through the black earth. Then, before the eyes of everyone watching, a single flower bloomed. It was a beautiful white lily unlike anything the underworld had ever seen. Its petals glowed softly in the darkness, casting gentle light across the surrounding stone. Nearby spirits stopped walking and stared in amazement. One elderly soul even rubbed his eyes, convinced he was imagining things. Persephone smiled and planted another flower, then another, then another. Soon a small garden surrounded her. White lilies, silver moonflowers, and golden roses blossomed across the once empty ground. Color spread through the shadows. What had once been cold and lifeless now felt warm and welcoming. Word spread quickly throughout the underworld. The goddess of spring was making flowers bloom among the dead. By evening, Dozens of spirits had gathered to see the miracle for themselves. Many simply stood there in silence. Some smiled. Others cried. For some, it was the first beautiful thing they had seen in centuries. Later that night, Hades arrived to investigate the disturbance his servants could not stop talking about. He expected chaos. He expected trouble. Instead, he found Persephone sitting peacefully in the center of a glowing garden. The flowers illuminated the darkness around her. The spirits nearby were smiling, actually smiling. Many had not smiled in hundreds of years. For several moments Hades simply stared. Persephone looked up and waved. "Do you like them?" The king of the underworld looked around at the glowing lilies, the silver moonflowers, and the happy souls wandering among them. For the first time in a very long time, he struggled to find words. Finally, he answered, "It's beautiful." Persephone's smile brightened. It was the first compliment he had ever given her. That night, after Persephone had gone home, Hades returned to the garden alone. He told himself he was only inspecting it, but deep down he knew that wasn't true. For the first time in centuries, a small part of the underworld felt alive. And for the first time in centuries, a small crack appeared in the walls surrounding his heart. What began as a single flower soon became something far greater. Every day Persephone planted more. White lilies spread across forgotten fields. Silver moonflowers climbed ancient walls. Golden roses bloomed beside roads that had been empty for centuries. Wherever she walked, life followed. The souls of the underworld watched in amazement as color slowly spread across the kingdom. At first, many believed it would not last. Nothing beautiful ever lasted in the underworld. But the flowers continued to grow. Day after day. Month after month. Year after year. Soon, entire gardens covered the once barren landscape. Ancient valleys transformed into fields of glowing blossoms. Crystal vines wrapped around dark stone towers. Trees with silver leaves appeared beside rivers that had flowed through darkness since the beginning of time. The underworld had never seen anything like it. Neither had Hades. At first he observed the changes from a distance. He told himself it was simply his duty as king. Nothing more. Yet he found himself walking through Persephone's gardens late at night. Sometimes he would stop to admire a flower. Sometimes he would watch spirits wandering among the blossoms. Many of those spirits had not smiled in centuries. Now they laughed. They talked. They remembered what happiness felt like. The change was impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Persephone stood atop a hill, overlooking one of her newest gardens. Thousands of glowing flowers stretched toward the horizon. Souls wandered peacefully among them. Children who had entered the underworld long ago played beneath silver trees. For the first time, the kingdom felt alive. Persephone smiled proudly. She had hoped to make the underworld a little brighter. She had never imagined it would become this beautiful. A voice behind her interrupted her thoughts. "You've changed everything." Persephone turned. Hades stood there. For a moment, neither spoke. A gentle breeze carried glowing flower petals through the air. The garden shimmered beneath the golden light of Persephone's magic. Hades looked across the kingdom. His kingdom. Yet it barely resembled the place he had ruled for thousands of years. The endless gray landscape was disappearing. In its place stood something extraordinary. A kingdom of beauty. A kingdom of peace. A kingdom that no longer felt lonely. For the first time, Hades realized something. The underworld had changed. And so had he. He found himself looking forward to seeing Persephone every day. He listened when she spoke. He smiled more often. He laughed occasionally. Small changes. But changes nonetheless. Persephone noticed them all. And secretly, she treasured every single one. Hades looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman who had walked into his kingdom and refused to leave. The woman who saw beauty where others saw darkness. The woman who had brought life to a realm of death. For a brief moment, something warm stirred inside his chest. Something he had not felt in a very long time. Then he quickly looked away. Persephone smiled. The walls around his heart were still standing. But they were beginning to crack. And for now, that was enough. The underworld had changed. What was once a kingdom of endless shadows had become a place of beauty. glowing flowers covered the valleys, silver trees lined the roads. Crystal rivers sparkled beneath golden lanterns. The souls of the dead smiled more often. Many even laughed. For the first time in its history, the underworld felt alive. Everyone noticed the change. Everyone, except the one person Persephone wanted to notice most. Hades. Not that he ignored what she had done. Far from it. He saw every flower, every garden, every smile she brought to his kingdom. The problem was that the more he cared for her, the more distant he became. Persephone couldn't understand it. Whenever they spent time together, Hades seemed happy. They walked through gardens together, shared meals together, talked for hours about their kingdoms. Sometimes she even caught him smiling when he thought she wasn't looking. Yet whenever she got too close, he pulled away. Whenever her hopes began to rise, he rebuilt the walls around his heart. It was as if he was fighting himself. And in truth, he was. One evening, Hades stood alone on a balcony, overlooking the transformed underworld. Thousands of glowing flowers illuminated the landscape below. The kingdom was beautiful. More beautiful than he had ever imagined possible. And all because of her. Persephone, the goddess who refused to give up on him. The goddess who somehow saw good in a man the world feared. The goddess he was desperately trying not to love. Because loving her was dangerous. Not for him. For her. Hades had spent thousands of years watching people leave. Mortals died. Souls moved on. Even gods drifted apart. Everyone eventually disappeared. Everyone except him. The king of the underworld remained. Alone. He could survive loneliness. He always had. What terrified him was the thought of losing Persephone. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. You always come up here when you're troubled. Hades turned. Persephone stood behind him. Her golden dress shimmered in the moonlit glow of the gardens below. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Persephone walked beside him and rested her arms on the balcony railing. The silence between them felt comfortable. Familiar. Dangerously familiar. You've been avoiding me again, she finally said. Hades looked away. I have not. Persephone raised an eyebrow. Hades, the king of the underworld, sighed. It was impossible to win an argument with her. Persephone turned toward him. Why do you keep pushing me away? The question struck harder than any weapon. Because he knew the answer. And he knew she deserved the truth. Yet the words refused to come. For several moments he stared out across the kingdom. Then he spoke quietly. Because you deserve better. Persephone's expression softened. There it is again. Hades remained silent. You still believe that, don't you? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The pain in his eyes told her everything. Even now. Even after everything they had shared. Even after everything she had done. Hades still believed he wasn't worthy of her love. Persephone felt her heart ache. Not because he had rejected her, but because he truly believed it. And for the first time she realized just how broken his heart had been, long before she arrived. The walls around it weren't built to keep her out. They were built to protect a lonely king who had spent thousands of years believing no one could ever love him. The days after their conversation on the balcony felt different. Hades was still distant, still cautious, still afraid, but Persephone could see the battle taking place behind his eyes. Every smile he gave her seemed followed by doubt. Every moment of happiness was quickly hidden behind another wall. It broke her heart. Not because he refused to love her, but because he refused to believe he deserved love. One evening, Persephone found him alone in one of the oldest gardens of the underworld. Silver moonflowers glowed beneath the stars. Crystal lanterns illuminated winding pathways. The garden was beautiful. Yet Hades looked as lonely as ever. For several moments, Persephone simply watched him. Then she walked forward. Hades. He turned and offered a small smile. A smile that disappeared almost immediately. Persephone had finally grown tired of watching him suffer. Tired of watching him run. Tired of watching him convince himself he was unworthy. Tonight she wanted answers. Real answers. She stopped a few feet away. Why won't you let me love you? The question struck him like lightning. The smile vanished completely. For a long moment he said nothing. The garden fell silent around them. Even the wind seemed to stop. Finally, Hades lowered his gaze. Because he knew he could not avoid the truth any longer. "When you first arrived," he said quietly, "I thought you would leave." Persephone frowned. "I stayed. I know. When I rejected Zeus's proposal, I thought you would hate me. I didn't." Hades looked away. "When I pushed you away, I thought you would eventually realize everyone else was right." Persephone's heart tightened. "What do you mean?" Hades laughed bitterly. "That I'm the king of the dead." His voice was filled with centuries of pain. "That I belong in darkness. That I am not someone worth loving." Persephone stared at him in disbelief. After everything they had shared, after everything she had done, he still believed that. Hades finally looked at her. Pain filled his eyes. "I have spent thousands of years being feared. Thousands of years being avoided. Thousands of years watching people leave." His voice grew softer. "You deserve sunlight. You deserve joy. You deserve someone better than me." Persephone could not believe what she was hearing. Not because she was angry, because she finally understood. This was never about rejection. This was never about the underworld. This was never about her. It was about a lonely king who had spent thousands of years believing he was impossible to love. Tears filled her eyes. Without hesitation, she stepped closer. Then closer still, until only a few inches separated them. "Hades." His name was barely a whisper. "You are wrong." The king of the underworld froze. Persephone placed a gentle hand against his chest, right over his heart. "I loved you before I ever saw the underworld." Hades stared at her. "I loved you before Zeus made his proposal." Her voice trembled with emotion. "I loved you when you stood alone in Olympus. I loved you when everyone else ignored you. I loved you before you ever spoke a single word to me." For the first time in centuries, Hades had no answer. Persephone's eyes filled with tears. "I chose you." The words shattered every defense he had left. "I have always chosen you." And for the first time in his immortal life, Hades began to wonder if she truly meant it. For several moments neither of them spoke. The moonflowers glowed softly around them. Crystal lanterns illuminated the garden with silver light. Yet neither Persephone nor Hades noticed the beauty surrounding them. They only saw each other. Persephone's hand remained over his heart, steady, certain, as though she could feel every fear he had carried for thousands of years. Hades could barely breathe. No one had ever spoken to him the way she had. No one had ever chosen him. Not because of power, not because of duty, not because fate demanded it. She had chosen him simply because she loved him. And somehow, that terrified him more than anything else. "Hades." Her voice was gentle. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Something inside him broke. Not painfully, not violently, quietly, like a wall finally giving way after centuries of standing. He looked away, trying to gather himself. But there was nowhere left to hide, no defenses left to build, no excuses left to use. Persephone had torn through every barrier he had ever created, and instead of running away, she had stayed. A single tear slipped down his cheek. The king of the underworld quickly looked away, embarrassed, ashamed. Persephone gently touched his face. "You don't have to hide from me." Hades closed his eyes. For thousands of years he had been strong. For thousands of years he had carried the weight of the dead. For thousands of years he had stood alone. And suddenly he was tired. Tired of pretending loneliness didn't hurt. Tired of believing he was unworthy. Tired of pushing away the one person who truly cared for him. When he opened his eyes again, he finally spoke the truth. "I love you." The words barely rose above a whisper, yet they echoed louder than thunder inside the garden. Persephone froze. For a moment she wondered if she had imagined it. Then Hades stepped closer. "I think I loved you long before I realized it." His voice trembled. "I loved your kindness. I loved your courage. I loved the way you walked into my kingdom and refused to leave." A small laugh escaped Persephone. Tears filled her eyes. Hades smiled. A real smile. One she had never seen before. You turned my kingdom into something beautiful." His gaze softened. "But the greatest thing you changed was me." Persephone's heart nearly burst. For years she had dreamed of hearing those words. For years she had hoped. For years she had waited. And now he was finally letting her in. Slowly, Hades lifted a hand and brushed a strand of golden hair from her face. His touch was careful, almost nervous, as though he still couldn't quite believe she was real. Persephone smiled through her tears. Then, without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around him. This time, Hades didn't pull away. This time, he held her back. The king of the underworld finally stopped running. The walls around his heart had fallen, and in their place stood something he had never believed possible. Hope, love, and a future he wanted to share with her. For the first time in his immortal life, Hades no longer felt alone. Years passed. The story of the underworld became known throughout every realm. Mortals spoke of it. Gods spoke of it. Even the stars seemed to whisper about it. The kingdom that had once been feared above all others had become the most beautiful place in existence. Gone were the endless grey fields. Gone were the lifeless valleys. Gone were the silent roads filled with sorrow. In their place stood a magnificent paradise. Glowing flower gardens stretched beyond the horizon. Silver-leaf trees sparkled beneath crystal skies. Rivers of shimmering blue water wound through valleys filled with blossoms. Golden lanterns floated through the air like stars. The underworld had become a kingdom unlike any other, and at the heart of it stood two rulers, Hades and Persephone. Together. At last, the lonely king who had spent thousands of years believing he was unworthy of love, and the goddess who never stopped believing in him. Together they ruled with kindness and fairness. The souls who entered the underworld no longer arrived with only fear. They found peace. They found comfort. They found hope. Many discovered beauty they had never known in life. Others found healing after centuries of sorrow. The kingdom became a place where lost souls could rest without fear. A place where even darkness held light. One evening, Hades and Persephone stood on a balcony, overlooking their kingdom. The gardens glowed below. Crystal waterfalls sparkled beneath the stars. Music drifted through the warm night air. For a long moment neither spoke. They simply admired everything they had built together. Finally Hades smiled. "I never imagined this." Persephone laughed softly. "Neither did I." Hades looked across the kingdom, then back at her. "Thank you." Persephone tilted her head. "For what?" The king of the underworld gently took her hand. "For choosing me." The words brought tears to her eyes. After all these years he still remembered. He still understood. Persephone smiled. There was never anyone else. Hades pulled her closer. For the first time in his immortal life he knew complete happiness. Not because he ruled a kingdom. Not because he possessed power. Not because he was feared. But because he was loved. And because he finally allowed himself to believe he deserved it. Together they looked out over the transformed underworld. A kingdom of flowers. A kingdom of peace. A kingdom of second chances. A kingdom built by love. And so the king of the dead and the goddess of spring ruled happily together for all eternity. Not because fate demanded it. Not because the gods arranged it. But because, from the very beginning, Persephone had chosen the underworld. And she had chosen Hades. And so, in the end, the goddess of spring and the king of the underworld proved that even the darkest heart can bloom when it is truly loved.